Friends, comrades, brothers. What does it mean to have them? Are they people we unconditionally love? Well, no, not quite. Otherwise, the expression, "you don't get to pick your family, but you do your friends," wouldn't hold any truth. Then in that case, are they just people with similar interests, or ones we were paired up with due to circumstance? Colleagues, classmates, and the like? Again, I don't think so. Plenty of people have the opportunity to go their separate ways after work or school, but choose to stay together. I don't claim to have all the answers to these questions. Maybe this game can make you think about it in a new way, help you reflect on these topics we really don't give enough thought to. Yakuza Kiwami opens with a pan of the Kamurocho streets we've grown accustomed to 7 years after the events of Yakuza 0. Then a slow shot of a dark office is set upon us, a man lying in a pool of blood, Dojima, and the one standing over his dead body with the revolver in hand, Kiryu. Right from the start, we know something's wrong here. The last game ended on a note about how killing isn't something to be taken lightly, and here we are starting off our main character breaking his promise to Nishiki. We cut back a day earlier to Shinji, Kiryu's protege and a character introduced in the last game. With him is Kazuma, and the title card informs us he's now a lieutenant of the Dojima family, a position Zero's main villains once occupied, now property of our hero. He stops by a company man trying to skip town because of his piling debts, where we get our tutorial, and on the way back is stopped by a thug he easily teaches a lesson to. However, we as the audience are soon reunited with an old friend, turned nearly unrecognizable.
桐生ってそういや堂島の竜桐生一馬ちゃんやお久しぶりです真島の兄さん
As Majima expertly displays his mad dog persona, Kiryu, ever the sympathetic protagonist, stops him from killing his own man, and even takes the beating once Goro turns his wrath towards him. An important thing to remind the audience here is that Kiryu's a lieutenant of the Dojima family, while Majima is Shimano's captain. Dragon or not, this Kiryu is still adhering to the same rules as when Kuze nearly killed him at the end of Zero, and is fully aware the one-eyed maniac outranks him, so he doesn't fight back. With one grisly foreshadowing, Majima warns him that one day he's going to have to compromise on his naive principles and go hard on even his own men, then leaves the scene. Finally at peace, Kiryu goes upstairs to Serena, where we see some more familiar faces.
どうなんだ桐生組の立ち上げは
The new character introduced here is Yumi, Kiryu and Nishiki's friend from the orphanage they grew up in. Although Akira is worried about his sister's operation, she quickly cheers them both up and they have a party as Kiryu passes out from too much of a good time. In a brief flashback, we see him buying Yumi a ring for her birthday, with her name inscribed on the inside, a token of his love towards her. Waking up, Kiryu urgently goes to deliver the money he collected earlier to Kazuma, now well out of prison and with gray hair. The conversation steers towards him getting his own family when...
Oh. 失礼します。桐生さんにお電話が。シンジさんからです。俺だ。
シンジです。レイナさんから兄貴に伝えてくれって。今さっき堂島組長がユミさんさらっていったんです。
ユミか。なんで組長に。
詳しくは分かりません。でも錦のおじけもそれ聞いて組長のところに。
錦が。で場所は。
劇場の横のビルの組長の事務所です。
分かった。すぐに行く。
おいどうした。
堂島組長が弓を強引に連れ去ったらしいんです。それで錦が一人で弓を助けに。
まずいな。組長は気に入った女はどんな手使っても手に入れる人だ。そこに錦山が入っていったら何が起こってもおかしくね。
俺行ってきます。
よせ。
え、
ここでお前まで行ったら3人ともただじゃ済まねえぞ。ここは耐えるんだ。せめて俺が手を回すまでお前は待て。
おやっさん、弓と錦は兄弟なんです。俺の。だから今俺が行かねえと。
カズマ。
As we enter Dojima HQ, now simply a small office compared to the fortress from the previous game, we notice the surroundings. We're right here where we saw him murdered, only it wasn't Kiryu who pulled the trigger. With the ruined and powerless patriarch devolved into a hedonistic mess, riding on the coattails of the 80s. Kidnapping Yumi, he tried to force himself on her. Enraged with the man and desperately trying to protect his friend, Nishiki was the one who broke the brother's promise instead. He shot and killed his own patriarch. Both in shock and unable to speak clearly, Kiryu takes the gun. He tells Nishiki to take Yumi and run. He has a sister to look after, and she needs him free. Kiryu, on the other hand, can take the sentence and assumes the stance we first saw him in. As a sequel to Zero, this is an incredibly jarring introduction. Shinji, the kid who hated Yakuza from the bottom of his heart, is now Kiryu's direct assistant. Dojima, the main orchestrator of the previous game's plot, is unceremoniously killed. Nishiki regrettably the executioner, and our main character is off to prison for God knows how long. If we're to present the first three Yakuzas as a trilogy, each middle point is the lowest depression of the main arc, and Yakuza Kiwami is nothing short of a tragedy. Stoic as ever, Kiryu obediently spends his 10 years in jail, with no outside information rather than the fact that Yumi has gone missing. Exiting prison alone, with no one waiting for him, who does he run into other than the Mad Dog himself, remarking on how a decade on the slammer can really turn a man even as hardened as the dragon of Dojima soft. This won't come up again for a long time, but Goto knows what all these years spent locked away with no hope or image of the future feels like, and he's been waiting for someone who's going to be coming out a lot later than Kiryu, if ever. Although presented in an otherworldly light 17 years ago, the caring and playful part of Majima breaks through to the surface in these interactions with Kiryu, annoying him and itching for a fight even in the most inopportune moments, but with good reason, to train him for the journey he's about to undertake. If I can break the train of thought about the story for a second, I'd like to address some criticisms about the Majima Everywhere system in the game. Just like Mr. Shakedown from Zero, Majima serves as Kiwami's world boss, offering a roaming boss character who you risk running into at every corner of the city. However, unlike the four brutes from the last game, Majima doesn't have big sweeping attacks that deal insane amounts of damage. He only has the styles from Zero, the styles you abused firsthand. His super attacks that stunned enemies or had gigantic reach, once the player's finest tools, are now your worst enemy, as you know just how devastating they truly are. Better yet, his interactions are as varied as can be, appearing in the most unexpected places and giving you the slightest hints as to his actual personality beneath the veneer of an insane knife-wielding madman. On top of that, while you have all your styles from Zero as Kiryu, you'll notice that the fourth one, Dragon, which used to be the previous game's secret unlockable, is now pretty bare bones. You don't need to fully upgrade it, but if you finish enough of Majima's encounters and the Coliseum fights, you'll be rewarded with, among many other abilities, the Tiger Drop, aka the most devastating move in the entire series. So, unlike Mr. Shakedown, there is a very worthwhile reward at the end of your strange journey. Back to the story, Kiryu is given a letter written by Kazuma, in which he is told to go to Club Stardust where some Shimano family thugs are rattling things up. Badass as ever, he hands their asses to them on a silver platter, before one of them pulls a gun. Shinji interjects. The club owner Kazuki and Shinji sit Kiryu down and begin to untangle what's happened over the last 10 years. Turns out that while Kiryu was up for a promotion of getting his own family, now that he was out of the picture, the honor fell to Nishiki. An interesting narrative point here is that since the Nishikiyama family is now a major pillar of the Tojo, alongside the Kazuma and Shimano ones, Nishiki, as patriarch, is in the same position that Dojima once was. Shinji then explains that he's actually a lieutenant in the family, planted there by Kazuma after some mysterious events took place, one of which is the recent death of third chairman Masaru Sera. Understandably, Kiryu is taken aback by all this and wants to speak to Kazuma, but he's off for the funeral, which means he'll have to sneak in himself. Inside, he is finally reunited with his father, if only for a brief moment, when someone shoots him in the chest with a rifle. Disturbed by the ruckus, Shimano bursts in the room, and outnumbered by the entire Tojo clan, Kiryu decides to run. one of my favorite long battles in the game, as the confused and distraught Kiryu fights his way through the entirety of Tojo HQ with this piercing and melancholic guitar that underlines his fear and sadness. You even get to battle Majima as he's under orders from his own patriarch to stop you, even though he just puts on the show for the clan. Fighting past the tiger himself, who we only now for the first time see actually unleash his claws, Kiryu manages to get away, but before he escapes, he manages to look back and see his brother he hasn't seen in 10 years, and he's just standing there, smirking and turning his gaze away. From here on out, there is no need to follow the story scene for scene, and we can talk about the game's themes like we did the previous ones. There are several ways you can interpret these, especially for Kiwami, but taking the story as a whole, I believe we can illustrate two major ideas that prevail throughout the plot and characters, those being the themes of fatherhood and brotherhood. After the funeral, Kiryu is saved by Makoto Date, a former detective he was interrogated by 10 years ago. Let off from the force and in pursuit of whoever killed Chairman Sarah, he and Kiryu team up to make sense of the conspiracy behind all of these events. During this time, Kiryu also bears witness to a little girl hidden in a bar riddled with corpses. He asks for her name. She answers, Haruka. Throughout the next few chapters, Kiryu, the hardened Yakuza, just out of jail for serving a 10-year sentence for murder, helps and protects this little girl, with the only link between the two strangers being the fact that they both grew up in the same orphanage. Yumi, Nishiki, Kiryu, and Haruka, all raised in Sunflower Orphanage, all taken care of by Kazama. With every time she gets kidnapped, we see Kiryu stalwartly rushing to the rescue, each time more pissed off and protective than the last. He even tries his damnedest to hide from her the fact her mother Mizuki is dead once he and Date realize, breaking down when the truth is revealed, and showing how hard he wanted to shield her from the life he was handed, the misfortune and pain he had to go through as an orphan dragged into hell by the ruthless hand of the Yakuza. It shows just how kind of a heart he truly has, that this innocent soul, whose path in life randomly crossed with his, can touch him beneath the exterior. And not just with Haruka. Date, the detective and pretty much only ally Kiryu has, is revealed to have drifted apart from his wife and daughter in his rabid pursuit of the Sera case over the last 10 years. Noble as his motivations are though, it becomes clear that he has spiraled out of control as his daughter is driven to an aimless life that gets her turned into a victim of Kamurocho's ruthless nightlife. Although a dead man on his own, Kiryu helps the detective, parallel to his bonding with Haruka, experiencing what can happen if he isn't there for her, not only as a protector, but a father too. We even help the informant in Purgatory, the Florist of Sai, protect his son from a Yakuza clan. Although both characters are given very little detail, we know that estranged informant has never actually met his own son, and only looks after him from the shadows. Seeing yet another ruined relationship Kiryu should learn from and not repeat. And then we have Kazama, the man we only now see after getting built up in Yakuza 0. Near the end of the story, we get the chance for him to explain what he's been meaning to ever since the funeral, about Yumi's life after the incident, her amnesia, and how he hid her away from Nishiki. It's revealed that while living her sheltered life, she met Jingu, and Haruka was their child, until Jingu decided to wipe away all of his hindrances for the top of the political ladder. Shintaro Kazama isn't a bad man, but he is a bad father, orchestrating the empty lot scheme regardless of the fact it put countless civilians as well as his own 2 sons in the crosshairs, telling Kiryu not to interfere when his own adoptive daughter is kidnapped by Dojima, and most egregiously of all, remaining distant right when Kiryu and Nishiki were at their lowest points, never bothering to talk to them or offer support. With his last words, he even reveals Sunflower Orphanage's true purpose, a place for all the children of the people he assassinated to grow up in. Kazuma is a deeply guilt-ridden man, trying to atone for his sins whenever he can, but still failing to stop the creeping consequences of his actions. While Kiryu solemnly states that he still loves him regardless of that, we can see this has already left an impact on the young man. Regrettably joining the Yakuza in his father's footsteps has given him the strength of a dragon, but cost him many loved ones along the way. The only thing left for Kiryu to do now is take on his father Kazuma's wishes and learn from his mistakes. Not to be a better Yakuza, but to be a better man. Have you ever had a best friend? For most of you, I'd wager the answer is a yes. We all have that one buddy, that one guy or girl we feel closest to, without whom nothing is quite as fun. Someone who'll be there for your greatest losses and your biggest victories. Someone who doesn't just share your interests, but someone who understands you, nearly as well as you do yourself, sometimes even better. A person that'd die for you, if need be. A brother not by blood, but something stronger. Conviction. But no matter how strong your bond, sometimes you find yourself questioning them. They disagree with you on something. You start disliking some little thing about them. No matter. All swept under for the sake of friendship. And yet, as the years go by, maybe you drift apart, maybe not. You notice they're doing better than you at certain things. You start off feeling happy for them, for their accomplishments. But in the back of your mind, an ugly little question starts rearing its head. Why not me? You feel disgusted at even the possibility of this train of thought, so you brush it off. But as the years go by, certain things become all things. Maybe he's better with school, work, women. He's stronger, taller, more handsome. Leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, and friendship turns to living in someone's shadow, which in turn transforms into resentment. With each chapter completed in Kiwami, we get a glimpse into what happened to Nishiki while Kiryu was in prison. He starts off being awarded his own family, and him immediately stating that he's going to use it to help his brother after he gets out of prison, with an attitude that most resembles the Nishiki we remember. Kashiwagi states that since he has no one under him as a former dojo and lieutenant, he'd be receiving some of Kazuma's men, and our next scene sees him in his own office, surrounded by the new arrivals. Only they're his in name alone. Not one of them accepts to follow Nishiki, and they explicitly state the only reason they're here is out of respect for Kazuma. Angered by the blatant insubordination, Nishiki is in disbelief, but puts his feelings in check. There are things worth swallowing your pride for. We learn that his sister Yuko's condition has only gotten worse since '95, and that he desperately needs money for her transplant. As he bottles up his feelings and has no one else to turn to, he accepts Matsushide's taunts and insults, taking the responsibility and shame just to save Yuko, whatever it takes. After all the disrespect, comparisons with Kiryu and shame, he finally has enough to pay for the surgery. But as he enters the hospital, he discovers there never was going to be a transplant. The doctor was a fraud, disappearing after his gambling debts were paid, broken, abandoned by his father, his brother rotting in prison, and sister doomed. He realizes just how much he sacrificed for absolutely nothing.
クソみてえなやつにも頭下げて死ぬ気で金を用意したってのに今までの時間は一体何だったんだ。もう優子には時間がねえってのに。
And yet, the next time we see him, he hasn't turned to violence. Just the opposite. As I talked with friends and people online about the series, Nishiki stood out as a pretty disliked villain overall. People were angered by his betrayal and labeled him as weak and petty. To me though, he's the best written and most meaningful Yakuza antagonist because, well, he's me. The reason why this particular character's story shook me as much as it did was because I was jealous of my best friend. I had those dark thoughts of envy and resentment. Those times where you never saw your brother in this type of light, but the constant reminders, the abundance of accolades and coincidental comparisons which push that little you've accomplished to the wayside, leaving you in the dust, forgotten, are things I know too well. And the reason you probably don't share these feelings is precisely because they are pathetic, narcissistic, and entangled with guilt. Alone and seemingly a disappointment to everyone around him, Nishiki prepares to take his own life, to atone for his sins and weakness, to retain what little honor he has left.
なんだいるんじゃねえか。おう組長さんよ、またしのぎ広げることになったからよ、金使わせてもらうぜ。おいこら聞いてんのか。こっちがせっかく動いてやるって言ってんだぞ。てめえいい加減にしとけよ。返事もできねえのか。あのな、おめえはどこまでヘタレなんだよ。たくまだ連れのキリヌが根性あったぜ。ま、奴がやっちまったことはまずいっちゃまずいとしても、キリは
誰がヘタレだって？誰が桐生よりも根性がないんだって？メイドの土産に教えてやる。堂島組長をやったのはこの俺だ。覚えとけ。
When a man is deemed incompetent, impotent, and devoid of any dignity, he's backed into a corner. He has no choice but to die or fight. Violence becomes the only way to prove one's strength. After all, he's gone all this way. Acting ruthless is just part of the job description. This is probably the moment most emblematic of Kiryu and Kazuma's failures. Instead of changing it, the institution all three were roped into remains a criminal and savage one, taking in the souls of noble men and spitting out husks with ruined lives. This is also why Kiryu never rejoins after the first game, only helping out people whose own stories were forcibly entangled with the Yakuza get as far away from it as possible. In a way, from this moment on, Nishiki forgoes his ambitions of honor, and is just doing his job, the only thing that hasn't betrayed him being the feeling of controlling your own destiny, the last thing he can cling on to, the only thing this world respects. After Kiryu helps the florist, he receives a call from Nishiki telling him he wants to meet up. The place? None other than their favorite spot from the past, Serena. For Kiryu, this is a chance to finally talk to his brother for the first time in 10 years, and hopes this conversation will reveal what happened that led to all this. Fashionably late, Nishikiyama arrives with his new slick-back hair and white-on-black suit. The two sit a few stools apart, signifying how distant they've now become. Nishiki gets right to the point, the 10 billion. Kiryu refuses to hand over Haruka, and the conversation gets nowhere. What matters in this scene is that it reinstates the fact that Nishiki was doing everything in his power to not stray too far from his and Kiryu's paths. What people might perceive as evil can be turned on its head if you put yourself in the man's shoes and look at things from his perspective. When he tried shooting Kiryu in Zero, it wasn't because his family ordered him to, but because he'd rather see him die a quick and painless death than be tortured and disfigured, just like Tachibana would later be. And in every logical scenario, that would be the kind thing to do, as no one could reasonably expect the 20-year-old Kazuma to take the entire Dojima family on by himself. Although he did not kill him, Nishiki had every right to take Kazuma's life, as he killed his biological mother and father. Even when he kidnapped Mizuki and tried to get her to tell him everything she knew, it was so that he could find Yumi, demonstrated by the fact he savagely kills his incompetent men who killed his friend's sister. Funnily enough, we now see his family finally start to respect him after his ruthless streak. He even says it himself when they meet. He was hoping they could still work together, torn on the inside between the path that made him finally strong and the path he knows to be good. The two men see each other amicably for the last time in their lives, and the meeting ends with Nishiki mirroring Kiryu's words from Zero.
お前とはこれまでだ。今日限り兄弟の縁を切らせてもらう。
もう今日限り兄弟じゃねえ。
At the end of the game, Kiryu is determined to take Haruka up to the Millennium Tower, a monument of pain built on top of the empty lot, one which will be the site of tragedy for years to come. There waits Yumi, with her memory finally regained, and revealed to be Haruka's actual mother. The three get a well-deserved reunion, abruptly cut short by a helicopter whirl from the outside. Jingu lands.
久しぶりじゃないか、ユミ。それにハルカ。
お前が神宮。
こうして会うのは初めてだね、桐生一馬くん。
Although I skipped parts of the game's plot and haven't really talked about Jingu so far, he's not all that developed, and for good reason. He's the antithesis to the game's themes, a selfish and greedy man, devoid of any spirit of fatherhood as he tries to kill his own daughter, just so the public doesn't discover his common past, as well as betraying Sera's brotherhood for the Omi once he realized the chairman actually had convictions, unlike him. He might be one-dimensional, but that's the point. With not even a barely altruistic motive in sight, Kiryu knows he's up against true evil. In probably the hardest boss fight in the entire series, Kiryu makes his way through waves of MIA soldiers until finally reaching the Millennium Tower's helipad. There lie Jingu and two MIA colonels who just don't know when to give up. In yet another superhuman display of strength and endurance, Kiryu dodges the array of bullets and grenades thrown at him, and defeats the snickering politician once and for all. But as he enters Ares again, his true opponent shows himself. With no more distractions, Nishiki slowly walks up to our heroes and lights up a cigarette. What seems like confidence on his part is just assuredness in the knowledge that time can't go back, that the past cannot be changed, and there is only one way forward to end both their pain. Yumi tries desperately to convince her former friend that there is still hope, and we can see his expression visibly change as he starts to believe her. But as soon as she mentions Kiryu, he's reminded yet again of the pain he associates with that name. Kiryu, in turn, tells Yumi and Nishiki that he's finally come to terms with what must be done and readies himself.
逃げることはできねえ。だから決着をつけよう。
なあ、決着をつけよう。俺たちの戦いに。
After the final fight, an exhausted but relieved Kiryu embraces Yumi. She unlocks the safe to the 10 million yen and gets ready to delete that money from history. But just in the nick of time, Kiryu's relentless code of not killing comes back to shoot him in the leg. It's interesting to note that Kiryu didn't develop his moral compass because of Kazuma or Kashiwagi, when he wanted to take a life and his brother stopped him right before the act. I don't know if we can honestly say he solely developed it because of Nishiki, as he kept it way past Yakuza 1, but as if to atone for that mistake and all others along that path, the koi rises to the occasion one last time. Yakuza Kiwami has made me realize a lot of things about myself. It honestly scared me how much my thoughts and feelings paralleled Nishiki's, but the scariest part was that I didn't see a way to resolve these issues. Sure as hell didn't want to end up the same way he did, but the game didn't really offer a good example of someone moving past these feelings of envy and inferiority. I still don't know if I've got the right answer, but I think I've gotten closer to one. You see, as we've already pointed out, Nishiki did what he did out of love, but as he felt his care was unrequited, just needlessly thrown out into an empty, bottomless pit, his actions became corrupted. What started off as building a strong family so he can accept Kiryu after his release and change the Yakuza from the inside together, morphed into becoming the most powerful, so he could no longer be ridiculed or hurt. His love for Yumi became an obsession, leading him to grow cold and unresponsive to people like Reina who wanted to help him and come to view Yumi as just another trophy to claim for himself and take away from Kiryu. But in the end, just as much as Nishiki bled out all his love, I think it's important for us to be reminded that being strong, being beautiful or talented is no price at all if it's not for sharing, just as much as it's miserable being pitied or dismissed. What point is there in ruling an empty world where everyone either hates or fears you? When I talked about prequels in the last video, I wanted to mainly underline the sheer brilliance with which RGG Studios made one of the most flat and boring characters in fiction into the series' best written antagonist, with the addition of a great prequel and several scenes in the remake, which don't even retcon or contradict the original story, just deepen it. If you're worried about this being the end of the Koi legend, don't be. The series has plenty more reminders of Kiryu's brother, even after he's gone. And hey, sometimes dragons resurrect, or at the very least, their spirit lives on. For now, I want to leave you with this. In Yakuza's spin-off, Ishin, the character portrayed by Nishiki's likeness, Okada Izo, has a boss theme called For Your Sake. If you align them chronologically with Nishiki's themes from 0 and 1 in the game's release order, you get a quaint little message, which I think perfectly encapsulates Kiwami's story. For whose sake? For your sake. For Buddy.
本当ですか柏木さん俺が自分の組を持てるなんて俺桐生のためにも頑張りますてめえの子分すらろくにしつけられねえグズの指が一体何の役に立つって言うんだああ情けねえこと言うんじゃねえそんなんじゃてっぺん取れねえぞこれちゃならねえその一線越えちまったら戻ってこられなくなる踏みとどまれ覚悟しろよ俺は一生おめえにつきまとってやる